Leaders and other representatives of several Amerindian villages across Guyana had an opportunity to collectively engage government on matters of concern to their communities at the 2014 National TOSHAOS Conference held on October 29. Held under the theme Harnessing the Power of Leadership, over 200 Amerindians gathered at the Guyana International Conference Center for the one-week event. This week on El Dorado Shines, you will learn more about the vital role the natural resources sector plays in the growth and development of not only the national economy, but Amerindian communities across the country.
The natural resources and the environment sector is very crucial and very important to your own existence, as it is important to the existence of all Guyanese. But there's a level of immediacy and a greater level of dependency on the management and utilization of the natural resources and environment sector, particularly for indigenous community. And that is why, if you look at all our policy documents and our national development strategy, starting from the National Development Strategy and its revised version, coming to the most recent Low Carbon Development Strategy, the welfare and the well-being of our indigenous communities continue to be central and continue to be given due attention, given the importance, as I say, of the need for this type of positive interplay and interaction between the environmental and natural resources sector and our Amerindian communities.
The NLUP is not prescriptive in that it does not aim to zone areas of the country for particular land uses. Rather, it aims to suggest a number of options for particular areas that can then guide decision makers and attract inward investment.
As every other income earner, persons engaged in gold and diamond mining must honor their tax obligations. Miners who employ operators, cooks, divers, and other tributers, as they are commonly known, are required to deduct 10% of the 30% income tax from the earnings of tributers and remit same to the GRA. Tributers are required to pay the 20% balance of taxes to the GRA on or before April 30 of each year where applicable. For more information, call 227-6060 extensions 1200 to 1204.
With more than 190 Amerindian communities in Guyana, issues and concerns about development and activities in the natural resources sector are inevitable. It is therefore important to have a mechanism in place to address this.
On a daily basis, there has to be a mechanism, and there is a mechanism working very closely with the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, the Ministry of Local Government and the Regional Development Councils, and other entities and arms and agents of the state in having those communities and having those matters addressed. This proactive effort is intended, one, to ensure that your concerns are speedily and readily addressed. Two, that you're also given the opportunities in terms of developing our natural capital, our natural resources, but at the same time, as custodians, as historical custodians of our rich biodiversity, particularly our forests, that you also are very integral in the management, in the oversight, and ensuring that you play a role in maintaining a level of stewardship that is not only desired for today's generation, but a level of stewardship that is required for generations to come.
The Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment has been working with Amerindian communities throughout the country as well as other stakeholders to further boost capacity.
We've worked with communities in the Rupununi, looking at community-based organizations, looking at small grants facility, because we've also sought to create links with our international partners so that we can accelerate not only what the government is doing centrally and not only the resources that we have, but also we sought to link communities and community efforts to also what's taking to national and multilateral organizations as such. And so we've had examples working with the Global Environment Facility and its small grants program, particularly targeting in Region 9. And then also we've sought to involve communities, and there have been a number of communities which have benefited and participated from the community-based monitoring, reporting and verification system under the RED Plus initiative. That is to ensure that we have sound forest management efforts.
By 2030, flooding has been estimated to cost $150 million annually, and extreme events such as the flooding of 2005 could result in $0.8 billion in losses, affecting 320,000 people. The need to identify and develop land away from the coastal plain has been included in the Low Carbon Development Strategy as hinterland adaptation measures to be undertaken in the period 2012 to 2015. Processing of applications for public lands begins at regional offices. Clients are usually referred to the relevant regional office for initial communication and transactions concerning application within that particular region.
As every other income earner, persons engaged in gold and diamond mining must honor their tax obligations. Miners who employ operators, cooks, divers, and other tributers, as they are commonly known, are required to deduct 10% of the 30% income tax from the earnings of tributers and remit same to the GRA. Tributers are required to pay the 20% balance of taxes to the GRA on or before April 30 of each year where applicable. For more information, call 227-6060 extensions 1200 to 1204.
Representatives from the various communities also shared some of their concerns and recommendations for improvement at the conference.
My main concern with regards to these natural resources is that of granting titles and extensions, where it was said in one of the articles that says GGDMA is now challenging that kind of process or exercise. But I just want to be clear, because I haven't heard anything on that, so that I can go home and say, well, this is the latest development of what was read in papers.
Two little things I would like to resolve. The one, land titling and demarcation. And the other is that lands are still being given out in Riversview. In fact, less than 1 month ago, when we were doing some inspection for stumps, we noticed a brand new line that was just a couple of days old.
I want to talk about our extension of land title between three communities, Freshwater, Rio, and Apterio. We have applied for our land title extension, and we are still waiting to hear what is the result of it from the Minister of Amerindian Affairs.
We do not want any other miners enter Kaku on the lands surrounding the disputed area.
We have 54 matters in the court as we speak right now. And a majority of those matters where we are dragged before the court, and this is only dealing with mining alone, we have other matters that concern forestry as well as land. Those 54 matters, the majority of those concern our action to protect your interests where the other party feels aggrieved, goes to the court, and the hands of the GGMC are tied. That's the reality we face. And when you have a ruling, and this particular ruling I'll speak to, and there are other rulings that we are confronted with. We have in the ministry and the GGMC, we have a legal department, and we also have a full-time law firm we have to engage. When I'm looking for staff, instead of the field, they have to be in the court giving testimony. At the staff now, they spend more time in the court than they can spend in the field. And why are they going to the court? To defend the action that we take, to enforce some of the same concerns you have, as well as to enforce the Mining Act, as well as the regulations that we have, as well as other sister legislation. So when you talk about your frustration, it is, as they say, the story of our everyday occurrence. And sometimes the lack of awareness, and the chairman of the NTC sits on the GGMC board, and he will tell you some of the issues that come up there. And to give you a front row seat, it becomes a battle for us even to simply enforce. We would issue cease-work order for illegal mining, bad practices, and we are taken to court, and that cease-work order is set aside. And we have to appeal to that. The next question, as raised by you, concern the whole issue of renewal of permits, particularly in areas that have not been fully titled. And there was a court matter in 2012. And I'll summarize for you what the court said, because this will allow you to go back to the community and understand the action or inaction of the GGMC. I had directed, and then prior to that we must stop accepting rentals as well as application for lands that coincided with proposed Amerindian areas. And so that was an administrative step, a policy that we've taken at a political level and given to the GGMC. This matter now, that decision was taken to the High Court. And the Chief Justice declared that the instruction of the minister was one, illegal as well as unconstitutional. And I want TOSHAOS to understand this. It is not that we're sitting down and saying, do what you want, do what respect proposed extension and the other type of concerns, but we have a ruling of the court. And so I do hope that you will understand and appreciate, and perhaps we should make this ruling a bit more known and a bit more prominent in this regard. And I do hope you now have a better understanding that our hands are tied, and they're literally tied by handcuffs. Because if we violate this, the commissioner, the minister, we can be thrown in jail for a contempt of the Chief Justice's ruling. The broad issue of consultation and being informed, as is provided for under from Section 48 going to about Section 52 of the Amerindian Act itself, whereby communities have to be informed, and then there has to be some evaluation to ensure that their impact will not harm the community and so forth. That has to be followed. And I want to tell you, in instances where this has not been followed by the GGMC, disciplinary action will be taken against those officers. And that is why it comes back to the original point that I made, that if we're able to have the line of communication with the agencies going, we're able to detect these issues very early and deal with them, to intercept them and even to prevent them from occurring and causing this type of concern. But we respect, and the directions that are given is that Section 48 to 52, which specifically talk about contiguous land and creeks and waterways and so forth, in and around Amerindian communities where there's an application or an intent to mine, that there must be some form of interaction and consultation in this regard. So we need to point that out. The second concern about Chinese and Brazilians and whoever else taking over the country. I want to draw a line of caution. We must not become hysterical and be part and suck up into or be sucked into a political propaganda that is taking place. This country is open to foreign investment, but we don't have dual standards where foreigners are treated at one level, locals are treated at another level, and anyone else at another level. We have a standard in terms of operations, whether it's mining, forestry, or any other activity. The laws are there and they're equally applied. Our law does not say that for foreigners, you must do X, and if you're a Guyanese, you must do the following. So I want to make that absolutely clear. The laws are there, and they speak to the activities rather than to to whether they're nationals or foreign. The second point is too, and it's interesting that you raise this, because I'm too concerned when I see, especially there are about 33 Amerindian communities that are engaged actively in mining, by many of them by Amerindians themselves, by people of the community. And in some instances, we've received reports of foreigners being brought into those areas with the consent of the Amerindian communities and without permission. And they're engaged in the most destructive form of mining, so much so that we've asked that the GGMC intensifies its monitoring within the Amerindian communities themselves too, as is provided under the Mining Act of 1989 and the subsequent regulations, as well as under the Amerindian Act. Because our laws are clear that you can only be a Guyanese to mine small and medium scale. So anybody mining small and medium scale and not a Guyanese, one, they're there illegally, or they have been brought by an individual or a group. And when they're in an Amerindian community, titled Amerindian community, I can tell you, they were brought by someone within that community. And I do hope in a general way, I've dealt with some of the mining issues. Let's talk a little about the land demarcation and the title process. Under the ALT program, there are 3 phases, and those communities have been identified. Those communities that have come on this year or after that process, I'm quite sure the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs is going through some mechanism in having those addressed. And we do hope those will be addressed expeditiously. Many of the applications, as well as many of the titles, are at different points, whether they're the land registry. Though once they've exited the Lands and Surveys Commission, there are other stages whereby they will have to be addressed. Some of the areas that were identified already and for which much work has been taken to advance have been areas where prior, long before there was any titling, more than 70% of those areas were covered with mining concessions. And whilst the Amerindian Act provides a mechanism whereby you can have some arrangement, and the role of the GGMC in that is not to negotiate, but rather to facilitate those interactions, we do hope, and in many instances, we've seen that level of cooperation whereby the community and the miner, even if the miner is from outside of the community, have been able to work out an arrangement where tributes are paid to the community. And there are many instances of that taking place. And we do hope in these particular communities, whether we talk about Tasserine or some of the other areas where they are posed to be problematic, that in going forward, we will be able to develop a mechanism where we can reduce conflict and rather foster one where there's a greater level of cooperation.
The urgent need for a national land use policy is recognized by the government of Guyana, and it is hoped that the plan could act as a catalyst to speed the finalization of this policy, and the development of integrated land use planning in Guyana. The primary objective of the National Land Use Plan is to provide a strategic framework to guide land development in Guyana. As such, the plan is built upon a number of national policies and strategies that have a direct relevance for land use and land management.
As every other income earner, persons engaged in gold and diamond mining must honor their tax obligations. Miners who employ operators, cooks, divers, and other tributers, as they are commonly known, are required to deduct 10% of the 30% income tax from the earnings of tributers and remit same to the GRA. Tributers are required to pay the 20% balance of taxes to the GRA on or before April 30 of each year where applicable. For more information, call 227-6060 extensions 1200 to 1204.
Minister Persaud also alerted the gathering to attempts by some groups to create confusion and distrust among Amerindian communities, which ultimately stymie progress and development.
There has to be greater work in terms of bringing about that level of awareness, that level of understanding, and that level of education. And we have to work over time too in dealing with that. And why do we have to work over time? Because every time there is an effort of sensitization, education, awareness, there's a group, particularly for one organization, that follows and seeks to undo all of that by spreading misrepresentation and falsehood and creating levels of distrust and in many instances, creating some level of confusion and are not helping us, as it were, to deal with the issues and manage the issues at hand. And in saying so, I want to alert you, because these individuals, particularly coming from a group, has made this their objective of sowing confusion, sowing mistrust, particularly among certain communities, but generally in our Amerindian villages. And you have to be on the alert in dealing with that. And perhaps we ourselves have to work over time about that level of awareness. Also, what we want to insist and what we want to encourage in many regards is that you engage the agencies in the natural resources in the sector much more in a more sustained way. And why do I make this suggestion? Because in instances, some of the problems and some of the concerns that are brought to attention could be better addressed and could be, in many instances too, could have been prevented. Had there been this communication and this interaction between the agencies. And the agencies are here to serve you. The agencies aren't just there in existence and sitting in Georgetown, or whether they're based in various, whether we're talking about the more than 28 forestry stations, and we're talking about, and we're currently increasing our mining or stations by another 16. They're not only there just for the sake of looking when there are breaches, or to be, as it were, the watchdog or on guard, but they're also there to provide support, to lend advice, and to work with you in addressing whatever concerns that you may have. And I want to appeal to you to ensure that you utilize and engage these entities, these agencies, so that they can better serve you and that we can have all those concerns that you may list and that you may have, that these are addressed and addressed very comprehensively.
The last such conference was held in October 2012. At that time, 2 resolutions were near unanimously adopted during the course of the National TOSHAOS conference. One dealt with the early determination by the judicial system of outstanding land issues, and the other dealt with the negative impact on Amerindian welfare and development that was caused by unfair decisions of political parties. Community development projects, presidential grants, Amerindian land titling projects, and the opt-in mechanism for Amerindian villages and communities were other highlights of the deliberations. Additionally, ahead of this year's one-week national conference, regional TOSHAOS conferences were held across the country.
Every point that you've raised, the staff here, whether they're environmental issues, land matters, forestry matters, mining matters, those have been raised, and there will be follow-up coming to your communities too. There will be follow-up in your communities to give you updates, as well as we're depending on you too, to reach out, to interact, and to work with the agencies.
Check us out on the internet for this and every episode of El Dorado Shines. Just go to YouTube, search for El Dorado Shines, and start watching. Or like us on Facebook and receive instant updates. You've been watching El Dorado Shines. Do join us again next week for another program. Until then, do remember that we all have a role to play in protecting the environment.